Greetings, denizens of the interwebs. As always, this is Jacob K. Baker for Atomic Stick Figure Productions, and this is Tokusatsu Smoke Break, bite-sized content all in one take. Now today I want to be discussing the character of Redking. Redking is, of course, a monster that first appeared in Ultraman in 1966. I cannot remember the episode number, I believe it's episode 9. Now, Redking is, in my opinion, one of the better built kaiju costumes. And I mean, the design in and of itself, I'm kind of torn on, because on one hand, I really like the way that it's designed, but on the other hand, I really don't like the fact that his head is so tiny, because he's got a pinhead. And if his head was just a little bit larger, I think it would be the best looking kaiju design. Now, Redking is a character who is a fighter. It's like every time that the character shows up, he's always pitted against another monster first, just to show how, like, brutal he is in combat. And then later in the episode, of course, he fights the Ultra of the show. And one of the things about Redking that I really appreciate is that he is a monster of personality. And I think that's one of the reasons why he's become a fan favorite over all these years. Because most kaiju, they don't really have a lot of personality. They're just big animals, or, forces of nature just destroying random things. But Redking, as I said, he shows his dominance by kicking the crap out of other kaiju. But at some point, something will happen. Like he'll drop a rock on his foot, or there'll be an explosion that catches him off guard, and he will react in the most ridiculous manner. And it doesn't help that he has his tendency to, like, just jump around and slap his head like Curly from the Three Stooges. But that simple character trait just adds so much to his personality. Now, the suit from Ultraman was used 3 times in the show. Of course, as Redking, and then it was altered into Aberos, where he was given a different head and a different color scheme. I think Aberos is actually cooler than Redking, just because his head looks more appropriate for that body. It might be a little too large, but I have this thing about monsters having larger heads because it makes them look more predatory. I mean, look at the Hyper Godzilla. He had a decidedly large head, and that's why I did that, because I wanted him to look like a predator. And predators typically have pretty big heads. And then later in the series, again, the suit was turned back into Redking and given his old color scheme back. Now, the big question is, of course, why is Redking called Redking? He's not red. Well, before the series was actually Ultraman, it was supposed to be called Redking. Redman. Boy, I botched that up. So, now, even though Redman eventually did come to be a thing, the initial idea for Redman was scrapped. But Redking was intended to be the king of the monsters in that universe. So whenever the series was turned into Ultraman, the character retained the name. And that name just stuck with him ever since. And the only time that Redking would actually be red was in the series Ultraman Powered, where there was actually 2 Redking. There was a female and a male. And the female actually looks just like a modern adaptation, or a then modern adaptation, of the traditional Redking design. Because it was still that kind of weird golden color scheme. But the male was practically identical, but the head was made to look a bit more menacing, and he was, of course, given the red coloration. And then Redking EX, which was, I think it was first brought into a video game, and then later brought into the series Ultra Galaxy? Yeah. Ultra Galaxy Neo, if I remember correctly. And I do not care for the EX design. They designed him to look like an ape, so he's got these ridiculously huge forearms. And because he was supposed to be stronger, they made him bulkier, which makes his head look even tinier. I think even the suit's actually shorter. And it's just not my kind of a design. Although the color scheme I really like because he's black and red to make him look like he's a fire type kaiju. Um, but that suit um, was fairly well constructed, although because the arms are so big and heavy, you can tell that the suit is straining to be held together because every time he lifts his arm, you can see the fabric on the underarm like stretch like it's about to rip. And speaking of quality of costumes, that's one of the issues in Ultraman Powered. Because even though that version of Redking, design-wise, is my favorite, apparently the suits for that show were not designed that well. So, they looked awesome. You know, they were given that Hollywood treatment, and most of the monsters in the show looked spectacular. Some of them looked really dumb, but for the most part, they all looked super cool. But because the suits were not designed for elaborate fight scenes, the series pretty much played out where Ultraman would show up and then just shove the monsters for a little bit, and then he would shoot them. So, not that entertaining to watch, which is very sad because, like I said, the designs are beautiful. So, this is kind of the opposite of the original costume, because the original one, even though I feel the proportions it could have been done better, that suit, you know, it goes through a lot. It was designed for wrestling, and it held together very well throughout all three of the appearances of the suit. I think the most visible, like, decay you could tell in the costume is that the back plate was obviously having difficulties being held on in the second appearance of Redking. But other than that, you know, the suit is a very beautifully crafted and well done suit. And of course, the character has so much parody, or personality. Parody? Terminology is fun. Anyway, I am actually over time for this video, so until the next time, I bid you guys adieu, and I hope that you have a very blessed evening.